Good afternoon and welcome to the first Health and Safety and Wellbeing webinar. Fire and Safety for Purpose-Built Student Accommodation and No Time to Lose campaign. I would like to thank the University of Liverpool for all their support, in particular Stuart Crowe, and I would also like to thank IOSH for their support through Dr. David Gold, Vice President of IOSH, for taking the time to be here today. And finally, a huge thank you to our two sponsors, Cognica, thanks Louise, who's Head of Sales, and Tetra Consulting, Dr. Sean Lundy, who will be chairing today's webinar. Sean is Director of Strategy and Innovation at Tetra Consulting. In addition to Tetra, Sean is also visiting scholar at the School of Design at the University of Greenwich. So afternoon, Sean, thanks very much for chairing today's webinar. So I was wondering if you could start things off, thank you.
That's great. No, thank you, Guy, and welcome everyone. We've got an exciting lineup of speakers today, and for those of you who've been in similar sessions, you'll be familiar with the sort of protocols I'm going to go through. But for those of you who haven't, you're all in sort of listen only mode, so we're the only ones with cameras on, and we're unmuted, and our speakers will present in turn. So I'm going to introduce shortly Dr. David Gold to start us off. But if you do have questions, please put your questions in the Q&A box. So you'll notice, if you're familiar with Zoom, there's a Q&A tab at the bottom of your screen. You'll be able to click on that and you can enter questions. And myself and Guy will keep a look at those questions. And then at the end of the session today, we've got a bit of time to respond to those questions, and I'll forward those on to the relevant speaker, and we're engaged in a bit of discussion. And I always find that bit of a webinar is normally really interesting. So as you have questions, please pop them in the Q&A, and we will get round to them. It is entirely possible, just from experience, that sometimes we don't get to answer all the questions, but if we don't get round to your question, I apologise in advance, but don't make that put you off asking those questions, but we will seek to address them after the event. And in fact, if we do have time today, we will potentially sort of go on a little bit longer, but the event today is due to close at 13:45, 1:45. So I appreciate you may need to drop off then, but if we're engaged in discussion, we may continue after that. So without any more hesitation, I'm going to introduce Dr. David Gold, who's Vice President of IOSH, and David has kindly offered to come in and talk to us about the IOSH No Time to Lose campaign. Dr. Gold has joined us from Switzerland, and he is an international consultant, very well known, working in safety, health and environment, and indeed fire safety and psychosocial issues at work. So David, I'm going to hand over to you, and hopefully you'll be able to bring up your screen and begin your presentation. So just bear with us a second while David does that.
I have a block on screen sharing right now.
Okay.
Let's try it again. Nope. Guys, somehow I am blocked.
Okay, so just bear with us while we resolve this. It's one of these little issues that pops up every now and then.
Let me try something here.
So I'm going to stop sharing, David. That might help, actually.
I think that'll do it, actually.
Yeah.
So let me just go back, if I may. One of the little idiosyncrasies of this kind of situation. Okay.
Are we okay, David? Are we able to share? That's brilliant. Fantastic.
Okay.
First little hiccup, but there we go. I'll let you crack on, David.
Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. My name is David Gold, and I kind of feel in some ways that I'm the odd person out today because you're here to talk about fire safety and no time to lose. But I'd like to build a little bit of a bridge. And what I'd like to say to you is that a long time ago, when I was in my 20s. I was a firefighter paramedic in the United States, in the state of Maine, in the northeast corner of the United States. And my wife, myself, I was concerned about my safety and health as a firefighter. I was concerned that I was going to be burned. I was concerned that a building would collapse with me. I was concerned that if we responded to a vehicle fire, that we may be in a situation where the car would explode or something would happen that was very dangerous. And one of the things that I was not concerned about in my 20s, I didn't know, I was not a safety and health practitioner at that point in time, was the whole issue of occupational cancer and how occupational cancer can have an impact on someone like a firefighter. But before I go there, my principal role today is as an ambassador. As a vice president of occupational safety and health, we have an ambassadorial role as far as IOSH is concerned. And I'm also an ambassador to the No Time to Lose campaign. Let me just talk for a second, if I may, about the Institution of Occupational Safety and Health, about IOSH. And one of the things I'd just like you to think about is IOSH, even though we're a chartered organization in the UK, we're very much an international organization. And if you look at the screen in front of you, you can see that we have members everywhere. But one thing that's important to also think about is that occupational cancer does not respect borders, does not respect boundaries. And it's something very similar to what I went through as a firefighter. It's something that, because of its latency period, because you don't necessarily see the direct results immediately, it's something that it's rather hard to establish in the minds or raise awareness of workers to be able to deal with things. So just to give you an example, in starting to talk a little bit about occupational cancer and the No Time to Lose campaign, there was recently a study done by the US National Fire Protection Association. And in the study, they determined that there is a 14% increase in cancer, 14% increase in cancer rates compared to the general population. That is 14% increase in cancer rate among firefighters. Now, what typically happens? You're fighting a fire, the air is all of a sudden clean around you, the building is well ventilated, and what normally happens is people take off their self-contained breathing apparatus. They start breathing air because they think the air is clean, but there is a chronic exposure to toxins. There is a chronic exposure to heat. There is also a chronic exposure to carcinogens that are released from fire-resistant material. And there's even potential that there can be carcinogenic substances that hang on the personal protective equipment, what we call the bunker gear that the firefighter uses. So I'm hoping by telling you a little bit about firefighters that I'm building the bridge about what my colleagues are going to be talking about a little bit later in the presentation today, and link this whole idea of occupational cancer to firefighting and hopefully have the link to something that is being said later, although we're talking about regulations and not occupational cancer, and I apologize for the spelling on the screen. But it is an important link. So if we think global, and IOSH, as I said, is a global organization, we have at least 742,000 people dying from cancer, work-related cancer every year. So we're talking about more than one death a minute. And this was a study that was done by the International Labour Office, where I used to work, the ministries of Finland, and the ministries of Singapore, and a number of other institutions, including the Institution of Occupational Safety and Health and EU OSHA. So we know there is a significant problem. Bringing it down to the UK, a study that was done in 2012 by Leslie Rushton basically indicated that we're having approximately 8,000 cancer-related deaths a year, 14,000 new cancer registrations each year. and just under half the deaths are actually linked to the construction industry. So this research is important, but many of you, like perhaps I am in some ways as well, are teaching in universities. Many of you are academics. How does this relate? How does this relate to the sort of things that we're talking about? And what can we do about it? IOSH has something that is extremely important. It's a tool, it's free, it's something you can use that's called the No Time to Lose campaign. Now, I would have liked to, when I was in my 20s, be exposed to the idea that there was a certain risk as a volunteer firefighter paramedic, that by inhaling certain substances, that I would potentially be exposed to occupational cancer. No one at that point in time was really aware of this. It's kind of like COVID, maybe a year and a half ago. People could not make the links, people could not make the bridges, but we know that if we are able to plant a seed, we know that if we're able to start to raise awareness of significant health issues that employees are facing, we can do something about it. And I think as we train young people, or we train people in second careers to get into the whatever field they're working toward, if they know about occupational cancer, they can start to protect themselves. Misinformation or information from other sources can be dangerous, and we've seen this with the current pandemic. So what we have is we have free, practical, original materials to start getting people to think about prevention programs so that people can protect themselves. And what we're trying to do with the Institution of Occupational Safety and Health through the No Time to Lose campaign is getting commitments from organizations to actually work to improve protective measures. Now, let me give you 4 active No Time to Lose focus areas. I so far have taught as an ambassador on different areas. I've taught 3 of them. One of them is diesel emissions or diesel exhaust fumes. And the word fumes is a little bit misleading because with diesel exhaust, it's normally the particulates that end up on the ground that actually then get put into the air by traffic that impacts on people. Solar radiation, many people know about it, but people aren't necessarily up to date with the latest sort of things. In the construction industry, there is a major concern about crystalline silica or silica dust. And one of the things that I was aware of when I was a firefighter was the fact that asbestos and the resulting asbestosis, mesothelioma was at that point in time something significant. But at the same time, I was working in Goodwin's Mills, Maine, in the southern part of Maine. There was a major naval shipyard in Portsmouth, New Hampshire, where they were building submarines. And when I visited the shipyard, I was astonished still in the late 1970s to see welders that were wrapped in asbestos blankets as they were doing their welding to actually provide fire protection on the ship while they were carrying out, or on the, I guess you would call a submarine, a boat, while they were trying to deal with this sort of thing. So they did not raise the awareness about the workers about asbestos. And many of these people years later developed, with a long latency period, asbestosis, mesothelioma, and passed away from occupational cancer. So if you note down the website, www.notimetolose.org.uk, you will find different materials that can be downloaded. We're also in a position to help you if you want to activate a No Time to Lose campaign. We have posters, we have information sheets, we have small pocket materials that people can use to work and raise people's awareness about this type of campaign. We also have, as part of the strategy that we use to deliver No Time to Lose, we have companies that have developed good practices. we've learned as safety and health professionals that, if we look at accident reports, that's important, but that is a bit reactive. We want to be proactive. So if we can find people developing a good strategy, developing a positive way to deal with some of these areas, some of these carcinogens that we're talking about, it becomes a tool that we can use effectively to try to raise people's awareness. So there's the possibility. The first step is you go online, you download and distribute the free practical materials. And we have different resources that you're welcome to go to our website, download, and use. And then if you want, your organization, and this doesn't necessarily have to be a nonprofit organization, any organization can support the campaign by reflecting on actions that people have to use and raise awareness through your own communications channels, but also our communication channels as well with the institutions. And then another step, if you like many companies have done, not only in the UK, but around the world. MTR is the transportation system in Hong Kong, for example. There's a campaign pledge that you can sign as part of it. Not mandatory, but the idea is there is a pledge to assess the risks, to develop a prevention strategy and deliver that strategy, to brief managers, to engage employees, to raise employee awareness. And when you're dealing with international supply chains, to try to work with the people in that supply chain to maintain that same standard and to report on progress of the No Time to Lose campaign. I have lost friends to occupational cancer. And I really wish, if I had the time machine, I guess it's the British Doctor No series, where you can travel back in time and come back to where you are now. I wish I could travel back and share the information about the No Time to Lose campaign with the people that were being exposed to carcinogens. Just like with the firefighters today, people, even 10 years ago, were not really aware of some of the occupational cancer risks of firefighting. And if you go on to the US NFPA's website, nfpa.org, they have a very interesting video that talks about deaths of firefighters as a result of occupational cancer, and some of the things that we should be doing about that to try to help people work through this devastating disease. Now, today we focus on a different area of occupational health, and that is addressing COVID-19. But I implore you, whether you be a university professor, whether you be a safety and health manager, whether you be a worker, to not let go of some of the basic safety and health tenets that we need to basically reinforce every day. Occupational cancer, occupational health being part of that package. COVID is important, getting people back to work is important, stimulating the economy is important, but don't let go of the occupational safety and the occupational health side of it. They become extremely important. As I go on, as I finish my presentation today, please feel free to contact me if you like. I'm happy to share my email address with you from the IOSH perspective or from my personal perspective. And as you think about what is going to be said about fire safety and looking at the updates as far as regulation is concerned, keep in mind that occupational safety and health is a multifaceted profession. We have fire safety professionals, we have safety professionals, we have health professionals, we have all kinds of different people. We have safety and health educators. All of these people need to work together. We have regulators, we have lawyers to do what's necessary to keep the world safe, to keep the world healthy. Last thing I want to say, as far as COVID-19 is concerned, please stay healthy, please stay safe, please get vaccinated. At that point in time, I'm going to turn this back over to Sean and there'll be a chance to ask any questions a little bit later in the presentation. Sean, I think I need to stop my share somehow.
That's okay. I've managed it. Thank you so much, David. A really important campaign. I've certainly made use of some of the excellent resources from the website, and I know a lot of my students have as well. So it's a really great campaign. It's been going for a while now, but it's not an issue that's going to go away anytime soon. So raising awareness, and I think is really important. And I really like the way you kind of made the connection there with fire and firefighting. That was really good. So I'm going to move on now to introduce Stuart Crowe. So Stuart is the Head of Risk and Assurance at the University of Liverpool. And Stuart's going to talk today about fire safety for purpose-built student accommodation as part of our theme around sort of building safety and fire safety. So over to you, Stuart.
Sure, thanks very much. Can I just check you can see the presentation?
Yeah, your screen's come up nicely.
Brilliant. So I'm going to talk about a project that the University of Liverpool have embarked on to try and get some reassurance about how fire safety is managed across purpose-built student accommodation across the city of Liverpool, and really influence how we can improve fire safety arrangements across the wider city region. So a bit of background to this before we go into detail of the project. So for those who manage and live in high-rise residential property, the spread of fire from external cladding really came to the forefront back in the 14th of June 2007 in London from the horrific events at Grenfell. And then later, towards the end of 2019 in Bolton, we had the tragic events at the Cube, the students' residential property there. So as a result of these incidents, the government introduced a variety of expert panel advice notes. And back in 2020, they were brought together into one advice note, which focused on external wall cladding, looking at HPL, high pressure laminates, and aluminium cladding, fire doors, balconies, smoke systems, and interim steps to mitigate any risk. This independent investigation also led to changes in the regulations, with approved documents broadening and tightening standards in external wall cladding over a period of time. This also led to building a safer future, an independent review of building regulations and fire safety, which presented over 50 recommendations for government to achieve a more robust regulatory system. The report said there's a need for a radical rethink of the whole system and how it works. This is most definitely not a question of specification of cladding, but an industry that is not reflected and learned for itself, nor looking to other sectors. So focusing in on the universities and the higher education sector, Gavin Williamson, Secretary of State at the Department of Education, wrote to all Vice-Chancellors at the end of 2019 and asked if it'd be grateful if we could please put in place a system to ensure there's 100% compliance across all buildings used by our students. This included, and please work alongside your private purpose-built student accommodation, and so it widened out beyond the buildings we managed ourselves, out into the buildings where our students sleep at night. This further developed, and we were asked further to look at areas where we nominate or recommend private student accommodation to students, and we should treat them as the same as we treat our own internal university accommodation. So where accommodation is being directly recommended to students by the universities, it's essential that students can be reassured that it reaches an appropriate standard of safety for all the residents. So all private providers signed up to a code, the NNUK code, which is the accreditation network for providers that provides support and promotes best practice for private residential accommodation. So we have to really work with these people to ensure that with suitable fire risk assessments in place, they're taken on board, the expert advice note and taking action accordingly. And where we didn't feel there was appropriate action being taken, work with local authority to raise our concerns and make students aware of any particular risks they might be exposed to from fire safety management or lack of it within their accommodation. So the AN-UK codes is a verification process that doesn't directly test compliance and any statutory or contractual obligations, and there's no way absolves providing organisations with responsibility to comply with such requirements. So it's asked universities to really look at fire risk assessments, ask private student accommodation, have they got suitable evacuation strategies? Do they test them annually? Are students made aware and reminded about the importance of fire safety? So that was a bit of so what we did on the back of that was how we responded to this. We undertook a desktop exercise. So through our Liverpool student homes, who act on behalf of all the universities in the Liverpool City region for a registered purpose-built student accommodation provider, we contacted all the landlords and asked for copies of fire risk assessments, external wall cladding assessments, fire strategies, evacuation strategies, and we reviewed this information. And this really gave us a benchmark of where we were across the Liverpool City region, and have we got that overall assurance that things are where we'd like them to be. What we found was some gaps. Some areas were excelling, some areas needed a bit of encouragement and pointing in the right direction to bring systems up to an appropriate standard. So building on the information that we found, we decided internally in the University of Liverpool, we want to create a vision, create a city with the safest student accommodation, a beacon of excellence for fire safety through ongoing collaboration of the review of fire safety across all higher education institute stakeholders, the local authority, the fire brigade, and purpose-built student accommodation providers. So we set out with an objective for this initiative to encourage best practice through engagement, sharing practice, education, and seeking evidence that purpose-built student accommodation providers are compliant with fire safety statutes and building regulations, as well as assurance for parents in over 16,500 student residence rooms across the city region. So this also gave assurance to higher education establishments in the city that we are putting our students in safe halls of residence. So how we did this, we formed a joint working group, and in that group we had representation from the universities in the Liverpool City region. We also worked with Liverpool Student Homes, who have a registered provider who work on behalf of the universities. We also brought in Liverpool City Council and their licensing department. We also brought in Merseyside Fire and Rescue to enable us to deliver this vision and deliver assurance across HCIs and give peace of mind to parents and students. So we felt this was really part of our civic responsibility to engage wider beyond the university, support the Liverpool City region, and educate. So the objective of this initiative is to encourage best practice through engagement, sharing best practice, education, and seeking evidence that our registered providers are compliant with fire safety statutes, as well as the assurance for parents in over these 16,000 student rooms. The first achievement really, when we had initial engagements, we reached out to purpose-built student accommodation to encourage people to really reflect on the changes due to COVID and how potential changes through COVID would impact the fire arrangements in each of their residential areas. The second achievement is that we are promoting the National Fire Chiefs Council's request to review and continually monitor and maintain fire safety arrangements through the COVID-19 pandemic. and seeking assurance. And the third achievement is we initially had an online safety seminar with them, with all providers, to raise awareness of up and coming changes, educate, signpost, make people aware of the new fire safety bill, make people aware and signposted of where you can obtain competent people to undertake fire risk assessments. It's a increase the standard for accreditation to be part of Liverpool student homes, and provide a networking and supporting a partnership across all stakeholders in the city. So what we're looking to do next really is the group will reach out to purpose-built student accommodation providers and highlight the importance of fire safety and the wider benefits, and being part of Liverpool students' homes, what that brings, and strengthen overarching safety and fire safety arrangements. As I alluded to before, the Hackett review made over 50 recommendations to government, and this particular group is looking to promote and educate, provide a clear understanding of roles and responsibilities for those procuring, designing, constructing, maintaining buildings and fulfilling responsibilities, accountable person and building safety manager positions, the use of competent persons to undertake fire risk assessments, and the mechanism to give students a voice on fire safety and purpose-built student accommodation. We'll also be looking to make potential changes in registration, helping purpose-built student accommodations providers to collate data to evidence and demonstrate compliance, to have oversight of better safety management risks in buildings across their entire life cycle, with a new requirement to provide specific information to agreed standards, for example, external wall surveys to demonstrate non-combustibility. We'll also look to monitor and get annual verification of information, continue to review enforcement action taken against any purpose-built student accommodation, look at any non-conformance highlighted through Liverpool student home inspections and also the fire service and local authority. Look at any student complaints, any concerns and any incidents or fires, and we'll learn from that and share that wider across the city. As the initiative gathers pace, our success will be measured through production of engagements with non-registered providers across the city so we can have influence wider. The aspiration is really to generate a fire safety culture across purpose-built student accommodation providers that will be monitored through engagement, networking, questionnaires, visits, observations, and information requests. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Stuart. Really important work, and I'm going to go next, but I'm going to sort of dovetail into what you've been talking about there. So I'm just going to find my presentation. There we go. So hopefully that's showing to everyone well. So just really to add to what Stuart was saying, I just wanted to talk a bit about the bills actually that are coming in that were mentioned in Stuart's presentation, the fire safety bill and the building safety bills. And we know these have arisen out of the post-Grenfell environment, the tragedy in 2017 that sadly took 72 lives in a place where people should feel safest. And as you know, the output of a lot of reviews and a lot of work, and I sit on a working group that's just concluded, actually, working group 8 on the building safety manager competencies. We've seen a lot of output, but buildings in scope from the building safety bill and elements of the fire safety bill will limit this to 18 metres above ground or buildings that are over 6 stories. But as pointed out by the Fire Protection Association and the MHCLG consolidated guidance note that Stuart mentioned, it does make it vitally clear that building owners need to do more to address safety issues in buildings under 18 metres. And as we probably realise, height is not the only risk factor when it comes to buildings. So there is a bit of pressure actually to look at this from buildings of 11 metres or more, and certainly broaden the scope. So there are a number of fires that have happened. Worcester Park fire is just an example. Back in 2019, a timber frame build where fire broke out in one of the flats and spread rapidly throughout the building, burning it to the ground. So it's a building under 18 metres, not in scope. The building failed due to either inadequately installed or missing cavity barriers, which allowed that fire to spread rapidly through the cavities of that building. Stuart already mentioned the Bolton Cube fire, which of course spread around the building in a slightly unusual fashion, but of course this was another cladding related incident on HPL cladding, where a discarded cigarette spread internally and then externally. And thankfully, because of the rapid response of the fire and rescue service and a decision on the ground to evacuate students from that accommodation, again, nobody was seriously hurt or killed. But it does highlight the issues of design in buildings and the materials of design, but also fire breaks and compartmentation issues that cause concern within industry. And the Crewe care home fire, I think, really points to a number of issues about vulnerability. And I know this has come up at the inquiry only very recently, the last couple of days. There's been some questions around the Grenfell inquiry around vulnerable residents and what measures were in place for those residents perhaps who can't easily evacuate in the event of a fire. And you can see again the Crewe care home fire. The picture on the right there shows the complete devastation caused by rapid spread of fire, failing of cavity barriers or missing barriers, which allowed that fire to spread throughout the building and along the roof void. This fire was started on a third floor sort of terraced area and then just spread around the building, almost completely destroying it. But thankfully, again, due to the decision making on the ground by the fire and rescue service and staff, they rapidly evacuated everyone and nobody was injured or killed. So the bills that are coming through, the fire safety bill, so the fire safety bill is designed to add, if you like, to clarify that regulatory reform fire safety order, the existing legislation, will also apply to structure, external wall systems, the cladding issues, and flat entrance doors between domestic premises and non-domestic parts. So in leasehold property, this is a particular area of concern because often landlords don't have any control over those front doors, and yet they actually serve a very important function in preventing fire spread. And it will also affirm the ability for the fire and rescue service to enforce against non-compliance in those areas. And very importantly, the bill will provide a firm foundation in which to implement the Grenfell Tower Phase 1 recommendations, which came out last year in terms of improving. We're seeing some of that already. So we've seen some recommendations around wayfinding signage, evacuation alert systems, and certainly installing sprinklers in buildings of 11 metres or more for new builds, but not existing builds. And the building safety bill, the key areas there that are coming through, the accountable person. So the accountable person will typically be a landlord, somebody who owns the building, the person right at the top. They will be required to gain a building assurance certificate from the regulator, and the HSE are leading the development of this new building safety regulator. They will need to appoint a building safety manager, which is a new role, and I've been involved in determining the competency requirements for that. And I'm currently involved in a Building Safety Alliance group, which is looking at producing a register for competent building safety managers. And indeed, the accountable person will need to develop a safety case, which is a new thing as well, in order to explain how that building is going to be managed safely. And it'll be the building safety manager's responsibility to manage that building safety case. The timeline for all of this, well, the fire safety bill will be implemented first. We're expecting that imminently. There's a bit of ping pong. It's going backwards and forwards between the Commons and Lords on various issues. A lot of this is to do with who pays actually for remediation work that may be required. So, of course, that's a big issue. The building safety bill, we're expecting royal assent in 2022, next year, and full commencement in 2023. And building managers and building owners have been encouraged to implement the requirements ahead of the bill becoming law, and that's very much the sort of work that Stuart's been involved in at the University of Liverpool. And Dame Judith Hackett made this statement that industry must be in no doubt, but it's not enough to wait for the bill to become law before they implement changes. we expect them to start taking action now. And of course, the bills, the building safety bill and the fire safety bill, need to be aligned. So there's a bit of work to do to make sure that the bills work well together. So the fire safety bill coming in first and clarifying elements of the regulatory reform fire safety order, but expect a lot of secondary legislation in that intervening period. So between the implementation of the fire safety bill and the royal assent and commencement of the building safety bill, there's going to be a lot of work going on in the background to develop secondary legislation and indeed guidance, because we're all waiting for more guidance on how to interpret some of the requirements that are emerging out of this. So one of the key things is the safety case, which is a requirement, will be a requirement when the bill comes in place. The safety case is that sort of document which will justify how a building is being managed and how the risks are being reduced. In the pre-legislative scrutiny, it's recognised actually that the safety case report is probably one of the most onerous responsibilities that are going to be placed on the accountable person. And in order to prepare for this, industry needs to know what it looks like. So, for example, we understand safety cases when we think about perhaps a nuclear power station or an offshore oil rig, but actually applying this same principle to residential property is quite new. So we need to understand exactly what that document's going to look like. And there's lots of examples from early adopters. And in fact, we're doing some work on this as pilot studies for a number of local authorities and housing associations to help them prepare. But the government have been encouraged to publish guidance as soon as possible so that we get some good idea of what this should look like. And one of the frameworks that we've sort of proposed is this type of framework, the golden thread of information, if you like, from design all the way through the life cycle of the building, but including some really key elements like compartmentation surveys. So do you know that your building compartmentation is sufficient to support the stay put strategy, that those areas, hidden cavity areas where maybe cavity barriers are missing, have you done enough investigation into that? Because we know that there's some concern about, and have you got things like a fire strategy in place, which is a normal, common thing we'd expect in a new build to be produced, but actually a lot of existing stock don't have fire strategy documents or indeed fire safety management plans. So these are additional documents. And one of the crucial elements of this review is about residents. The phase of the inquiry we're in at the moment, we're hearing from residents from Grenfell, and they're not very complimentary actually about the way they were engaged prior to the incident at Grenfell. So resident engagement is really at the heart of this new regulatory regime. And of course, risk management systems, using technology to help us manage all of this stuff and all of this documentation. The interesting thing about the safety case report, it's not designed to be a huge document. And the initial guidance was it should be a sort of 12 to 20 page document, which seems quite small. But of course, all it's doing is commenting on all those other elements, which of course will be much bigger bits of information to help manage fire risk. And Dame Judith Hackett, again, has come out quite recently and talked about proportionality, making sure that all of these activities and all of this information is actually going towards managing real risk, but it isn't creating unnecessary bundles of paperwork and costing excessive money, which isn't actually going into reducing the risk. So there's a whole issue around proportionality here, I think. So of course, a lot of this there's been a lot of focus on cladding and external wall systems, but I just want to sort of point out, of course, the things that we see. I work for Tetra Fire Risk. We do health and safety consultancy and fire risk assessments, and we produce somewhere in the region of 8,000 to 10,000 reports a year. We see a lot of compartmentation issues in a lot of building stock. So a lot of concern around that, and I think there is a strong need to look at your buildings in a bit more detail, to do more intrusive surveys, probably at least once in every 5 years, just to make sure that the building remains well compartmented. Poor fire stopping is another thing we see quite regularly. And also perhaps advising on fire stopping expectations as well. In other words, what does good look like when it comes to fire stopping? And that's an interesting area for property managers, because often they're not necessarily trained to recognise what good looks like in this area. So I think there's an education piece to do there. and the very important aspect of front doors. So in the new legislation that's going to come through, and the guidance, there's going to be a very strong emphasis on doors. And already I know a lot of accommodation providers are putting a lot of work into reviewing doors, making sure they're fitted correctly. They provide an absolutely essential barrier to fire. And most, certainly in flats, most fires will start in a flat, of course, or inside the accommodation. Most of the time they will be contained. But of course, if those residents evacuate and there's no self-closure on the door and the door's left open, then the fire can very easily spread into the common parts, into other units, and also into the external facade. If it's still flammable, that will present quite significant risk to the occupants. So very rapidly going to draw it to a close there, but very happy to answer any questions anyone may have around this very interesting subject. So I'm going to stop sharing there, and I will move on to Louise. Now, Louise, I don't need to put my other slides up, but I'm very happy for you to suddenly share your screen if you're ready to go. So just by way of introduction, Louise Gray, who hails from Swindon. I used to live near Swindon, a place called Rawton, just outside, lovely part of the world. So Louise is the head of sales at Cognica, and Louise is going to talk about fire safety and regulation 38 in particular. So over to you, Louise.
Yeah, I think I'm following on really from what everyone's topics of today have been. This is more around the kind of compliance and best practice. We work with our clients here at Cognica around, obviously, Regulation 38. We know the building safety bill is coming in as well, and it's about what does best practice look like? What do we need to implement now, and what do we need to perhaps look for in the future? So we'll just take you through that. I do have a mini video to show you about some of the concepts and ideas we're now doing with some of our clients in regards to trying to demonstrate compliance in essence around this area. So if I continue, I've just got it on one screen. I hope it shifts. So in regards to fire safety, we've kind of touched on it. I'm kind of glad all presenters have used different images from Grenfell. But the Grenfell disaster is about, obviously, the new regulations coming into force. We have had many incidents prior to Grenfell, but this one was a big hot topic because of the amount of lives which were unfortunately lost. And this has driven the kind of the new phrase, the golden thread, which comes out of the Hackett report. And it's all about how many changes are going to happen? What does responsibility look like within the industry? And so what it's truly meaning is who's going to take account and responsibility for that in a pre-build model during the build process for new building, and then for the estate owner after the building's done for the rest of that building's actual life cycle. And we've also got to look at the retrospective, which we've touched upon in other presentations. How are we going to be able to provide this information? And considering Cognica predominantly come out of an operation and maintenance manual perspective, we know through our history how the O&M handover documentation is left to the last minute. We're called in to basically go get it all. And that needs to change in a philosophy around how you build. And that's why BIM level 2 is becoming more and more apparent. It was meant to be best practice, it still is, but it's also moving into the BIM level 3 region of how are you going to manage your estate once it's built? Who's responsible? How are you going to maintain your compliance? Which does cover off your documentation. That's your audit trail and your responsibility. And you should be doing a gap analysis around, have we kept up to date with any fundamental changes in our building? Now it's 10 years on from when it was built. And if I was to be honest, when speaking to some of our clients, they've gone no. So how do we get there? And that's what we've been more discussing nowadays around this. So really moving forward, and as the Hackett report said, we shouldn't be waiting for the new bill. We shouldn't be reactive. That's how Grenfell happened. We should be being proactive. It's no longer good enough to be best practice versus cost. I know we've gone through COVID, but actually the forefront of all of our minds, and that includes what David mentioned in the first presentation about occupational health, we still struggle today with asbestos in these buildings. And we need to start taking a more proactive view and start dealing with these. And even though the government has stated it's probably going to add up to £500 million worth of costs in the industry to implement these changes, and that could be anywhere up to 100k per building, it is about lives overall. You're going to sell maybe a flat off and make money. So it's a case of what's the best drivers? How can we incorporate this? There's going to be a lot more administrative burdens coming into it. And how can we actually use technology, I would say, in progressing that, and actually making it more cost effective to manage into the future. So what we've had with some of our clients over the last year or so, since Grenfell, I'd say, is we've got a very basic approach, which some clients are requesting, where when you're collating this information on your building, you separate out the fire management plan and the risk assessment documents. So they're easier to find. You have your audit trail there. That is kind of a basic requirement. And the standard approach now, which we're working with the University of Leeds, it's kind of a first step on their road to compliance. And we're just engaging in it as we operate their document management system, is we are now separating out basically fire plans, drawings, any fire engineer reports, systems, data, anything to do with that regulation, into each of their buildings that we have the documentation on. The first step is doing that separation. The second is then reviewing that document, those documents which are available, seeing where their gaps are so that they can go away and build a road to compliance roadmap for themselves to work to. In the 21st century, so that's kind of moving it on, is that's what we do with them. They're already in a live document environment, and that's something to strongly consider. Other than the environmental impacts of having a printed copy of your O&M documentation, you should be putting this into a live system so that it's easily searchable. Everyone's got the right access to it. It can be kept up to date on a regular basis for any fundamental changes, which is the key to this. And then there's a next gen approach, which we're doing with Galliard Homes, which is digital twin technology. So we are building a new document management system for them. We're going in and we're taking a scan of that building, which also provides them with a point cloud so they can redesign it at any point. But what that does is actually give you the visual aid, and you can link that into your document management system. So it's linked to the information about your fire extinguishers, all of that. And then you can plan your PPM schedules or any testing that needs to be required into a works management system, which we're supporting them with. So it's a step-by-step journey. So I do have a miniature video. It's always good. I can talk about a lot of things, but oh, I clicked the link. I already had it prepared. Give me 1 second. And this is basically demonstrating everything that I've already discussed in my presentation. It's about going with digital technology in the modern era and going, actually, we can do a lot more by taking these scans. It's not just acting as a point cloud for your design purposes.
Louise, just for your, is there a sound with the video?
There is, it's only music.
Okay, great. Okay,
so
sorry.
I've cut the music out.
I do apologize.
Yeah, that's all right. So as you can see, we've linked certain areas of the building to the document management system, which enables you to then download that information relevant to what's there. What is also good in this circumstance and doing retrospective is that if you don't have that document, you know you've identified a risk straight away. And obviously it builds up a nice picture. You can find it out. And whilst we also are trying to work with the emergency services, especially local to us at the moment, and with Galliard Homes, it means they have a visual representation when they're coming in, because if you do have a fire, you have to provide your evidence. They need to see these plans as well. So this makes it a lot easier for that audit trail and compliance purpose. With the ultimate goal is that none of us want to have a fire or put any lives in danger. So it comes back to start applying best practice early. It doesn't have to cost as much as people think, and it really will save you in the whole life cycle of your building moving forward, because this data only needs to be updated, especially a visual, when you are making fundamental changes to that building. So that is pretty much me. I'm happy to answer any questions, and I hope it's been a bit insightful. And you can, as I said, with us, you can link anything to anything. It's technology today, so you could make this simple for your users as well. I'm done, Sean. I'll hand back. I think
that's great. No,
10 minutes.
Thank you very much. I'm going to stop the share. There we go. Thank you very much for that. Thank you for all our speakers. Really great. And we've got some good questions coming through as well. I think if I was in a room and you're all sat there in the audience, I'd probably get everyone to give the speakers a round of applause. So or imagine you doing that sat behind your computers. So we've got a couple of questions come in, which I've been scrolling through, some really good stuff. One for you, David, actually, just off the back of your comment around firefighters, actually. Robert's asked a question: what controls are required for firefighters as preventative measures against cancer when responding to a fire incident? So I guess this relates back to your experience as a firefighter yourself.
Well, it relates, thank you. It relates back to my experience, but at the same time, I'd like to take it from the knowledge that we have today. And one of the most important things, I mean, back when I was a firefighter / paramedic, I mean, in the United States, we did rescue, emergency medicine, and firefighting all at the same time. And we did not have necessarily the awareness and the knowledge about occupational cancer. We were having people, and when I was teaching in a fire school, which is located, which is part of university systems in the United States, some of the fire schools, we were strongly pushing the idea of the use of self-contained breathing apparatus. And one of the things, I left the United States in 1985 to come to Europe. And one of the things I found internationally as well as nationally is the habit that most of us had as firefighters to remove our self-contained breathing apparatus too early. Now, in 1985, we were talking about carboxyhemoglobin and the risk of increasing that and the risk of an increase of a heart attack. And it's equally important as far as reducing the risk of cancer. Heart attacks are a little bit more immediate, where cancer is a long latency period. But if someone does, there are protocols in place to keep your self-contained breathing apparatus on through the period of what is known in the fire service as salvage and overhaul. The fire is out, but you're starting to pull materials down. There's still a lot of hot sort of substances, fire protective substances that are in the air, they're airborne. And if the woman or the guy, the firefighter, removes their self-contained breathing apparatus, that increases the risk of a carcinogenic situation. 2 or 3 other points. I won't dwell on these. And I want to ask a question on the back of this, if I may, to the 3 panelists, if I may, Stuart. Sean.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, go ahead.
Okay. But the other thing that that's a focus now, and it's a focus with the NFPA, it's also a focus with the U.S. Fire Academy, is the maintaining of individual personal protective equipment for firefighters, because there is stuff that is coded. Now, if you think of what I shared with you earlier about diesel and the fact that diesel particulates are on the ground and then they're activated by tires, they're activated by traffic, and that's when it gets into the respiratory system. Fire gear, bunker gear, when it gets back to the station, if it's not properly maintained and cleaned, some of those carcinogens that were potentially airborne as things are hanging around the station can also potentially promote airborne carcinogenic substances or even skin-borne carcinogenic substances as far as the fire is concerned. Taking my opportunity while I have the floor, I would like to pose a question to the 3 panelists. As some of you know, I was chair of the Fire Risk Management Group of IOSH for a number of years. And one of the things that became of concern to me in that role, and it's still of concern to me as a professional, is this whole idea of fire risk assessment. Now, it is absolutely, risk assessment is critical to our profession in safety and health, and anyone teaching safety and health needs to teach risk assessment so people understand what risks are, because we're doing risk assessments all the time, every time. You cross the street with your kid, you're saying to the kid, look both ways. That's a risk, that's part of a control measure based on a risk assessment. It's the whole game. But at the same time, there seems to be people that feel they are risk assessors, fire risk assessors, that have gone through some kind of training in fire risk assessment, but because at least a year ago, and I don't know the situation today, and I don't know if it's linked to any of the legislation that's coming forward with Grenfell, there is no UK standard as far as fire risk assessment. And a 2-day course to teach someone to be a fire risk assessor, even if they're a very competent individual in fire safety, even if they're a fire safety engineer, I'm not sure is sufficient. I think there's something that needs to be done to make sure that the issue of risk assessment is on everybody's lips and that there is eventually some kind of standard, some kind of practice so that the general public is getting the right thing? And there have been judgments in the UK on that. So I'm going to, if I may, Sean, I want to ask this question or ask for comments from the panelists about this issue of risk assessment.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I'll jump in straight away, David, because yeah, I completely agree with you. And I think it's something that for too long there's been quite a varying standard in the competency of fire risk assessors. And there's been a number of schemes, third-party accreditation schemes, the BAFE SP205 scheme for organisations, and both the IFE and the IFSM, that I'm a member of actually, have registers. But I know that there's a lot of work going on in the background to make this a bit clearer. So I've come off the back of a competency working group for building safety manager, but actually, of course, the company I work with and sit on the board at, we do an awful lot of fire risk assessment. So we take competency very, very seriously. But of course, we do come across lots of examples of where it's clear that people don't have good enough levels of competency, particularly when we're starting to look into buildings in a bit more detail. So when you start looking at external wall systems and you start looking at compartments, that requires a level of sort of building engineering knowledge, perhaps, that you don't get from a 1 week course. You know, you need a lot more to do that. So I think, you know, as I'm sure everyone's aware, you know, the definition of competence is one of the definitions, and know your limitations of your own competence, as well as having adequate knowledge, training, experience, and behaviours. And part of that behaviour piece is to not extend yourself beyond your level of competence. And I think some of this is coming out of Grenfell, actually, that there's a couple of examples of that, not just around fire risk assessment, but also around general knowledge of buildings, which I think is a concern. I'll let Stuart and Louise jump in as well, because I'm sure they've got some thoughts on this.
I totally concur with what you're saying there. It's something when we did that review of our purpose-built student accommodation, it was quite apparent. The standard of fire risk assessments differs considerably. And if you are a fire risk assessor undertaking a fire risk assessment of a quite simple 2-story office block, is different to taking a fire risk assessment for a heavily engineered laboratory or university building. So there is different criteria, and as you say, the work coming out of Grenfell, they are looking at competency frameworks and third-party accreditation to different levels of different types of buildings that people are undertaking risk assessments for. And quite rightly put in the chat by Glenn there, there is a fire risk assessment register. So their competency is being looked at by their peers. So we've got that to build from. But there is probably some work to do nationally in that particular area.
Yeah, and there's been a number of registers for a while, but they're sort of consolidating into one. And the standard, there's some work going on in the background around with BSI and others to try and determine that. Sorry, Louise, did you want to?
Oh yeah, I was going to say it's. I think you get what you pay for. Being honest, I mean, when you do your audits annually on your quality management systems, you've got BSI, you've got many different people that can do it, and I think it comes down to, does that person have the experience in the industry? What type of experience is that? And I'm glad that we have the fire risk assessors, but I think it's that transparency. Actually, if you pay for a good one, you're going to have a very good one, but you've also got to be willing to take the fact that you might have a lot of non-compliance in your report. And I think if we're being honest with each other, we should always go for what's going to be the worst case scenario, because it's the only way to make us better. So yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I spend a lot of my time. I took a decision a number of years ago not to talk to my own profession too much, but I was very interested in the property management FM profession. So I tend to spend a lot more time speaking to property managers, and I think that the message I send to them is, you know, show some diligence and you know, think about the competency of the people you're engaging to do all of this work for you, because often they just take it at face value, and I think that's where things actually go wrong. So them having the securing assurance that people are competent at the right level, but also knowing again what good looks like, is a big thing. So we haven't quite got that right yet, but I think we're on the path. Somebody did ask a question. I'm just going to, sorry, David.
Let me just say thank you.
Yeah.
It also reflects at the same time, post-COVID, that resilience and being able to understand risks and manage risks is surfacing as a very, very important element of the occupational safety and health profession. So thank you for the responses for that. I appreciate it.
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, I think we've got a lot to offer in so many dimensions, even around specialist areas like fire safety. So there's a number of questions here. Some people have just asked for contact details and slides and things like that. So just to say, we will send the slides round. I've certainly got my contact details on the slides, and I know everyone else has as well. So you'll be able to get in contact with us afterwards as well. Just picking up on that theme, somebody did ask about fire door inspections. What's the competency requirement there? So, I mean, I can answer this. We have a number of our consultants who are trained on the fire door inspection scheme, which offers a diploma in fire door inspection and also offers a register as well. So you can register there to be an inspector. And again, I think it's one of those very niche areas that it is, you know, if you're going to get involved in fire door inspection, it seems simple, but actually it is very, very necessary, I think, to have proper information on that to get the fire door right and to know what you're looking for. So there are many elements for fire door. So fire door inspection scheme is the one I would go for. You can Google it. It's very easy to find. Lindsay asked a very good question, which is very topical actually, around disabled occupants. What practical arrangements can be made or can we have for the safe evacuation of disabled occupants? A subject very close to my heart. My eldest son is disabled, and we used to live in a block of flats. I can tell you a story about that. We had an issue with doormats, so we lived at the end of a corridor. My son was in a wheelchair, and people started putting doormats out, and it made it difficult to get the wheelchair over. So I popped the note for everyone's door and said, please, could you remove your doormats? And actually everyone did. In the morning, they were all gone. But I'm pretty sure if I'd have put a note through the door and said, can you remove the doormats? I'm a fire safety consultant. They probably wouldn't have done, and they would have probably got grumpy with me. So it's kind of interesting about the messaging around that. But out of Grenfell, the inquiry concern around vulnerable occupants and disabled occupants has been raised, and personal evacuation plans. I don't know, Stuart, I don't know if you've got any comments on that. So I'm sure this is something that comes up in your properties.
Yeah, we undertake personal evacuation plans for all students that need them. We also have general evacuation plans that visitors can use, or new people to the building and things like that. So that's how we pick up that area, really.
Yeah, and I think I mean, it depends on the occupancy, doesn't it, as well? So a sort of a regular residential block would be expected to operate a stay put policy. It can be difficult actually if there's a fire in the premises that the disabled occupant is in. They would have to leave, but they may find it more difficult to leave. But the idea, of course, is that the fire is contained. In other blocks where there's a simultaneous evacuation strategy, that can be more difficult, and that's where you need these refuge points predetermined, and the individual themselves would have to have a personal emergency evacuation plan designed for them. And this is looking to bring this in actually as a more pertinent requirement in the bills that are coming forward. Louise, I don't know if it's something you sort of deal with in your world.
Not too much, and I was responding to a question, but
okay.
But no, I pretty much agree with what we've all been talking about around that area. So I don't have too much more on that.
No, but I mean, hopefully that sort of addresses. I mean, I think it is a requirement that's going to come in. I remember years ago I used to work for a social housing provider. I was a group head of health and safety, and it was a difficult area for us, and we knew we had a responsibility to do personal emergency evacuation plans, but we always found it quite difficult to implement, and we were largely, it was down to the information we had as well. So if we weren't made aware of situations, it made it very difficult, and also they can be difficult to formulate. But it is something where you need to get good, competent advice, I think, to advise you on that, and it's certainly worthwhile having a policy on it. So Mohammed's asked a question: what should be an effective evacuation plan for a high-rise building? Kindly highlight control measures as well. Okay, well, that sounds like a training course to me. So I don't think we've got too much time to go through everything, but I mean, certainly, I'll invite Stuart as well to comment on this, but a lot of evacuation plans will depend on the nature of the occupants. But in the UK, in residential, we adopt the stay put policy, which is the policy that National Fire Chief Council has endorsed. It is part of the guide, purpose-built blocks of flats guide, which has now recently been withdrawn, actually. But the principle of stay put is still in force. We only really operate of simultaneous evacuation strategies in areas where they are staffed, commercial buildings, or indeed perhaps care homes. But even care homes have often phased evacuation where it's a combination of both. Stuart, I don't know if you want to comment on that in terms of how that affects student accommodation.
Yeah, we've got a combination really. Our newer buildings are all stay put, or certainly our high rise newer buildings are all stay put. And that seems to work quite well, and we constantly test that and see how that plays out. It's only our smaller, probably 2-story house style accommodation that we'd fully evacuate really.
I was going to ask David, is this different in this? I know you haven't been in the States since the 80s, but it's a slightly different approach, isn't it? We have this stay put single staircase exit, whereas I think buildings in the States are different, aren't they?
There are in certain areas, yes, in certain areas, no. You know, there are different codes in play. Some states recognize the NFPA codes. Some states recognize other codes as far as the way things are. There are frequently safe areas that you'll see in buildings, but it's often a challenge also. How safe is a safe area? How well is that safe area? What is that safe refuge? What are the criteria for safe refuge? And I don't have a full answer for you. I can look into it if you like. I can put you in touch with someone if you want to get a.
No, I was just curious actually, because I think one of the challenges I often get is it's different in the UK than it is everywhere else, and I'm not sure that's true actually. I think the building philosophy around compartmentation is pretty universal, but I think some of it is to do with single staircase, the fact that a lot of residential buildings only have one exit corridor, which limits.
To just share one other thing with you, and I think from an IOSH perspective, I'm proud to say that there is a certain degree of world leadership that the UK is providing. If I think about an international ILO meeting that I was the expert for in Geneva, where we had firefighters from all over the world, fire officers from all over the world, and federal or national fire people. We talked about the UK system of check-in and check-out as far as firefighting is concerned. When I was a firefighter, that did not exist. You never, in principle, you never went into a building alone, except if you're in a rural area and you're the first guy on the scene and you have a child screaming from the building. I mean, it's the sort of heroics that you see in the fire service, and it's something that I'll never belittle, that sort of thing. But there has been a lot of leadership that the UK has shown in many areas as far as fire safety is concerned. And we're still seeing fires. We're still seeing life loss fires. What happened in the beginning of this century in Bangladesh, I investigated fires in Bangladesh that were supplying multinational companies in the supply chain for the ready-made garment industry. And you would think that these companies would have, and in fact, part of my work was to help with that, but would have insisted to a certain extent that the fire standards were the same, at least in the country where these factories were sending their material to, and it wasn't. So things are different everywhere, but the UK is, from my perspective, from what I've seen, the UK has provided a strong example of strong leadership in many of these areas.
That's really good to hear. I'm just mindful of time. I just had a flash up of it's 1:45, so we are at time. But I think we'll continue if that's okay with the panelists. And if you need to drop off, I appreciate you may have another meeting to go to. So please feel free to do so. But if you want to stay on, we're going to continue addressing the questions. And for those of you we haven't addressed your question, we will seek to do that. There was a question about, does the new bills apply to Northern Ireland? It's only England and Wales, actually. Northern Ireland and Scotland have their own legislation, but it will. There's lots of similarities going on, so we are looking at benchmarking across that. But fundamentally, the bills will only be England and Wales. There was James asked a good question actually, and I did mention it early on, that the LGA guidance, purpose-built blocks of flats guide, that was developed back in 2012. I remember consulting on it, which has been used as a baseline for a lot of fire risk assessments, has now been withdrawn. And we've seen this as well with fire strategies past 9/11, that's been withdrawn as well. And we're still waiting for a lot of guidance to come in and replace that. So I think in the interim, we're probably still running with other guidance that's available, the calls, and there's a new BSI document coming out around fire risk assessment, which will be useful. But I think we'll probably see a replacement for the purpose-built block of flats guide to help sort of develop our understanding around things like safety case and the need for fire strategies in taller buildings and so on. So so James, I can't really answer that question, only that I know it's been withdrawn and hasn't been replaced yet. So like a lot of, it seems that we should have maybe replaced it. So I don't know, Stuart, if you've got anything to say on that, or Louise, if you were aware of that. So it's more for the fire risk assessors, I think.
Nothing to add on that one.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's more about
Yeah, so someone's just asking, Louise, whether you'd be able to share your video. I think you can share that, can't you? As
yes,
part of,
that link is on my presentation, so anyone can click that and you'll be taken to it.
Oh, great. That's fantastic.
Not a problem.
So John is just asking, do you have to be an IFE member to be considered competent for fire risk assessments? No, not necessarily. I mean, IFE is a very well-respected professional body for fire engineering and fire risk assessors and fire managers. There's also the Institute of Fire Safety Managers as well, which equally runs a register. I think I think this will be sort of considered around levels of knowledge, and I think most fire risk assessors would seek to be a member of a professional body. There's also another professional body, the Fire Institute of Fire Officers, I think.
I think being part of an accredited body or being on a register gives your organisation some assurance that you're recognised. I appreciate people may work within an organisation and might not feel that they need to be.
Yeah, that's right.
The same applies for being a chartered member of IOS. If you're part of an organisation, there's no requirement for us to be chartered members, but it demonstrates that competence and gives your employers some assurance. That's my view on that.
Yeah, I mean, I was recently came off of being a chair of OSHCA, the Occupational Safety and Health Consultants Register, and there was a lot of call early on with OSHCA before I got involved with it for regulation of professions, like health and safety. But I know the government and the HSE are not keen on that approach. They don't want to see that approach. So I think we're only ever going to go for strong guidance and requirements in legislation of competence, but not necessarily defining exactly what institutions or what levels of membership competent people should have. I think that's not going to happen. So again, I think it's down to organisations to show a bit of diligence, and you have to make your own mind up there. But the only exception to that is probably around external wall systems, and you need a fire engineer who is also a chartered engineer with relevant experience. They have sort of specified that in the guidance that's come from government recently. So that's a very key thing. So, and there have been some fraudulent issuing of EWS1 forms, the external wall system forms that RICS developed, where people just signed that off and said, yeah, everything's fine, but actually they weren't competent to do so. So again, that's down to diligence. I think you need to be careful about that. Andy's just asked here, he's just made a comment actually, which I think is very, very relevant, about the Hackett report. It appears to be very onerous initially and ongoing for organisation. So the Grenfell tragedy occurred as compliance failures for cladding in respect to the building regulations and failures with flat doors in respect to fire safety order. Do we think that the fire safety bill adequately addresses these deficiencies? It's a really good question. So, see, Louise, you're smiling, so I'm going to go to you first.
Will it be adequate enough? Well, we'd hope so. I think the point that they have stated, this is basically a first piece to the puzzle. and the safety bill following it will add to that, and they'll work it together, and that will only grow. I don't think it's going to be a bit like CDM regs update when we did that. It's a big bang around the Manslaughter Act, but that's it. They do the odd amendment, but we've got over 60 changes coming into the current fire safety piece to be implemented, and I just see it growing from there. So I don't think anything can be perfect. It can only improve, but it will be probably 80-85% of the way where it should be, because they're still going to face queries around how much cost is this going to add to people and companies, and we're going to have to work through that and feedback, and I think there'll be a whole loop, and I think it'll be done correctly, and I think it will be as safe as it can be as it moves forward and grows.
Stuart.
Yeah, I think these new gateway systems they put in, where you've got to have some checks and balances as you're going through the process, will add, and people can go back and reflect and see what's being done. I think they'll add value, but only time will tell if it successfully achieves what it does. But it's heading in the right direction. But some of the mitigation and some of the checkpoints, I think, will add value to the process, and will really, go back to Andy's point about the compliance side, will really help people question and have that discussion. And we've got that golden thread of information, so we're going to know what kind of materials are on buildings moving forward. Where some buildings now that are built, we have that information. So as we become more aware of products and materials, we can go and reflect and review what building materials we've used.
Yeah, I think there's still a lot we don't know with the bill. We don't know the final shape of the bill, actually. That's one thing. And also, we don't really know what the secondary legislation is going to look like. So in terms of the fire safety bill, like as Louise says and Stuart says, it will address some issues, and it does take us some way towards the goal. But I think some of the detail will come in the secondary legislation and in fact the guidance, actually, which is probably why they've removed the purpose-built block of flats guide, because of course it was written quite some time ago, and there are a number of issues in there that aren't covered, and definitely we know, like you quite rightly mentioned here, Andy, fire doors and building regulation issues, which were kind of not ignored, but there's an assumption that building regulations were fit for purpose, and therefore all buildings that were built were safe. But now we know that we quite rightly have a little bit of our confidence has been knocked, if you like, in terms of building standards, and that needs re-looking at. And that was actually the original purpose of Hackett Review. James as well sort of adds to that by saying post-Grenfell has been extensive investigation debate regarding protection and response, all of which is crucial, but considers what should happen once the fire is started. However, there appears to have been little, if any, focus on prevention. It's a good point, actually. Of course, the 2005 order imposes duties to apply the principles of prevention. I wonder what the panel feel should be done in this regard, and how, particularly across the residential sector, we should do more. Well, certainly, James, I completely agree with you, because the data we have, actually, I said we do about 10,000 reports a year, certainly with regard to fire safety. It's all about compartmentation. Actually, we see a lot of compartmentation issues, and we do focus on that in a way. In my mind, that is about prevention, because it's about prevention of fire spread, but there's a layer before that, of course, which is preventing the fire starting. So I don't know, Stuart, I'm going to go to you, actually.
Yeah, we do a lot of work with our students. So we have a welcome pack that talks about fire safety. We have a welcome video, which talks about fire safety and the hazards and risks around fire safety, and cooking and use of candles and not smoking, etc., etc. So looking at prevention before a fire starts, we do a lot of work up front. We also have warden meetings with students on a regular basis, where fire safety is discussed and the importance of that, and we share lessons with students about the impact of actions that they take that can have on fire within the halls of residence. So we do a lot of stuff proactively and engage with our students cohort to talk about fire safety and the impact of if you've been out and you come back and you put the cooker on and leave it and walk away, and really encouraging people to follow the rules that we've put in place, because they're there for their safety. But yeah, it's a really good point raised. We must think about how to prevent and encourage the culture and change hearts and minds about what people are doing in the building to cause a fire.
Sorry, David, you jump in.
Yeah, I'm also there's a number of different aspects, and I very much appreciate what Stuart just said and fully agree with him. I think there's also the aspect, and it's something that I'm very concerned about, and that is the people's preparedness and using education to change people's behavior. Should there be a fire? Should a fire alarm system activate? I was just sharing in the process of preparing an academic paper, and there's a case study which I observed. I was in South Africa. This is a chemical plant, and I was teaching a course in safety in this particular chemical plant. We just came back from lunch and the fire alarm goes off. Now, this is a chemical plant where a fire in this plant can blow the roof off the plant. And, I said to the students, the participants in the course, who were all the people that worked at this particular plant, okay, stop what you're doing. Please calmly go to the nearest exit and go to the assembly point. And an individual sat there and said, this is an absolutely critical email. And, I said to her, this is not a drill. This is a realistic situation. We didn't concoct this. Move. Okay. And I closed her computer and she moved. But this sort of thing is pervasive in industry. I mean, you can imagine in an office building in Chiswick Park, for example, in the UK, and someone is in the process of negotiating a £5 million deal, and the fire alarm goes off. And they're conflicted. And they're conflicted in many ways because the training is not sufficient to change the heart. Stuart just used the word hearts and minds of people. To change the hearts and minds of people. Now, that is not prevention. Prevention is stopping the fire from starting in the first place. But there is this whole idea of fire protection. You've talked a lot about that today, but there's the human dynamic of fire protection as well. There's the behavioral side of it. And we know that in Bangladesh, in the UK, and a variety of different places in the world, the behavioral concept, the behavioral side of it costs a lot of lives. And we need to focus, especially if we're, when we're educating people to go into the world of work, they should have this mindset before they actually get into the world of work, and it should be reinforced in the world of work. So this is something we need to think about as well.
It reminds me, David, of when I read the report on the Worcester Park fire that happened, obviously, post Grenfell. They all left the building. As soon as they realized there was a fire in the building, they left the building. It was a stay put policy, but they made the point actually that they were affected by what they saw at Grenfell, and that changed their behaviour. One of the things, I work with another body, we've campaigned actually for a national education campaign on fire. In light of what's coming down the line, so to encourage people to, not remove self-closers from doors, to react to fire alert systems, to cooperate with property owners and property managers. These are really key things. So Louise, I don't know if you had anything to add to that. I'm going to draw things to a close soon, just in a couple of minutes, but I'll give you the last word on that.
Oh, I do think it does come down to it. I mean, I'll probably cover off a couple of questions I think which came in at the end, but I mentioned the CDM regs, and it's all been here before. It's already written out about our roles and responsibilities, and most frequent accidents we have on site are typically human, just basically a person not doing what they've been told or taught or educated to do, and that's probably the same with fire. But what CDM did was put that responsibility and accountability on somebody higher up, so they took more of a view of it. And that's the same with this fire safety update, really. But it still comes back to this training and awareness of individuals. We still have accidents on site, no matter if we're going for 0 accidents. It's because we do like to take shortcuts. So it's really trying to get across. I've been in many fire seminars, and they're showing some horrific videos or pictures that actually there's consequences to these actions, and being responsible, that it's not a bad thing. It's just prioritize your life over something else, and others, because that's what's really important. And I think that is an education piece, but I think it also comes down to the world of people kind of only thinking about themselves rather than others as well nowadays in society.
It is an observation I've had as a health and safety person working in buildings and fire, you know, and straddling both areas, is I think the human factor in fire is often ignored, in fire safety, and it's something that I think we can improve on. There's just one last thing, and I did want to pick it up before we close. James actually he's asked a question around BS 9997, which is fire risk management systems, and the British standard around that. What do we think about it? Do we think it fits? Well, I certainly, in the model I put up, I would certainly include that as part of the safety case, because it's part of the organisational system, if you like, that's designed to manage fire safety, and it's a very similar. It's based on the Plan, Do, Check, Act cycle. You know, the Deming wheel, which we're familiar with other systems, and I think it's a very useful thing to put in. But there's always a danger with these systems, and it can become very bureaucratic. So just going back to that proportionality comment I made earlier, I think you've got to be careful that you put the system in and it's very meaningful to you. It isn't just a case of putting files in a cabinet and you know, having a lot of Plan, Do, Check, Act stuff to do that doesn't relate to the risk you're managing. So
before you sign off, please, there's just one very important question that I just read, if I may.
Yeah.
And someone says, do you think the benefit of sprinklers ought to be considered?
Oh, yes, yeah.
And I think that is a very critical. I mean, I remember in Bangladesh, there was a fire protection engineer in a seminar who described to the Bangladeshis, you know, a sprinkler is like having a firefighter, many firefighters in your roof that you can activate once there's a certain amount of heat. And sprinklers, whether they be in homes or whether they be in industry or wherever they are a very, very critical issue in saving lives. Now, I'll make that political point, and I'll let you guys from the
No, I think well, certainly we've seen a change to building regulations for new builds and sprinklers for buildings over 11 meters. I do get a lot of questions about the costing of installing sprinklers, so it can be quite expensive. You know, somewhere between £600 and £1,200 a unit to get a sprinkler system retrofitted. But like you say, David, you know, the benefit of it is significant, and it's very, very good mitigation in the event of a fire, and certainly in helping people leave that building unimpeded. Actually, it can make a big difference. So look, I'm going to draw it to a close. If any of the panelists have got any last minute statement they'd like to make, now's your chance. If you'd like to jump in. If you don't, I just want to say thank you to all of you for doing a fantastic job as panel members, and also for your excellent presentations. Thank you to the participants who stayed on with us whilst we answered those questions. And again, we will scan through the questions again to make sure we haven't left too many out. And if we have, we'll respond. And we will provide copies of all the presentations, any videos, and our contact details should you wish to get in contact with us a bit later. So thank you very much. Thank you, Guy, for putting us all together. And thank you to the sponsors as well. And thank you, David, for joining us from representing IOSH on the campaign there, which again is a fantastic piece of work, which has been going on for some time, but has huge relevance still, and probably more so actually as we go into the future. So thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Sean.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thanks, Sean. Thanks, everybody, and thanks everybody for attending. And the video will be out later on today or tomorrow. And yeah, we're asking everybody what they'd be interested in hearing about going forward, and if anything from today's webinar, if we could dive into in more detail. But I'll drop some details out. And again, thanks very much for everyone's time, and thanks for Stuart, Sean, Louise, and David for being here today. Thank you very much, everybody. Cheers.
Thanks,
Thank you for having us.
Everyone.
Bye-bye.
Take care.
Bye-bye.
Bye.